When I first started playing this build, I found it extremely underwhelming. However, as I learned more about the build and its weird interactions and mechanics, I started to realize how powerful it actually was. There's so much in this build that doesn't do what it says, and there's so much of this that enables the build to become powerful. Once you learn all of these pieces, you will realize how powerful this build actually is. As we figured out how all of these different mechanics interacted with Overpower and figured out how to perfect our damage, we were able to start clearing 100s and speed farming 90s. And this is with inoptimal gear. On top of this, we're getting a buff in the next patch that's going to make this build even better. The calculation for Overpower damage is supposed to be simple. It's just supposed to be your life plus your fortify times your Overpower multipliers, and then all of these are added to the base damage of the skill. However, there are several important exceptions to these rules that make the build function as well as it does. A fantastic example of one of these exceptions comes from the comparison between the Edgemaster's aspect and Coalesced Blood. Both of these powers increase the damage of skills, but for whatever reason, Coalesced Blood increases the damage of the Overpower, whereas Edgemaster's doesn't. Understanding all of these little exceptions is what makes this build function so well. We save skill points, we optimize aspects, and we make perfect Paragon boards once we have all of the data for what works and what doesn't. I want to give a quick shout out to MacroBioBoy and Ludiar. Both of these players did a ton of testing with Overpower, and I used a lot of the data they collected to optimize this build. I linked both of their videos going over these tests down below, and if you want to see them, definitely check it out after you finish watching this video. Bloodlance is a very interesting ability. Its range is immense, and the way that it works with Overpower is quite important. The range is so high that you can often kill enemies who aren't even on your screen. Whenever you hit an enemy with Bloodlance, it sticks in that enemy, and then all of your additional Bloodlances will pierce through that enemy. The stuck enemies will also be dealt damage every time you cast Bloodlance, which becomes very important when you're talking about Overpower. Because what happens is every time you get an Overpower proc, it's going to damage every enemy that has a Bloodlance stuck in them. And because of Supernatural Bloodlance, we're going to be overpowering every 6 casts of Bloodlance. And this is why attack speed is so important, so we get as many procs as possible. And then with Rathma's Vigor, we're going to get a guaranteed overpower every 12 seconds. Overpower is based very heavily on your ability to maintain a high life pool and high fortify. It's also a build that relies very heavily on essence generation. Our solution to these 3 problems is going to come in the form of Blood Orbs. Blood Orbs are going to heal us, they're going to give us fortify, and they're going to give us essence. To generate loads of Blood Orbs, we're going to be using Blood Wave, which will spawn 3 every single time it gets cast. We're then going to run the Tidal Aspect, which will cause our Blood Waves to be cast 2 additional times, and each of these casts will spawn 3 more Blood Orbs. This gives us a total of 9 Blood Orbs. These orbs by default will heal us, and then we combine that with the Blood Drinker's Glyph, which will cause them to also give us Fortify. We then also run the Potent Blood Aspect, which will cause these orbs to additionally restore 20 essence as long as we consume them while we're at maximum life. So what's happening is we throw out a Tidal Wave, the Tidal Wave gets cast 3 times, it spawns 9 Blood Orbs, each of those orbs is healing us, giving us Fortify, and restoring essence. To further increase the uptime on these Blood Waves, we're also going to be running the Fast Blood Aspect. This will cause it to reduce the cooldown of our ultimate by 1.5 seconds every time we pick up a Blood Orb. And with cooldown reduction on all of our gear and the absurd number of Blood Orbs that we're spawning, we're able to constantly spam Blood Waves, which will CC enemies, push them away, and spawn Blood Orbs. This pushback ends up being very important because of the incredible range of Bloodlands. You're able to push mobs off of the screen and kill them without them even being able to hit you. We then run the Gore Quills Aspect, which will cause our Bloodlands casts to automatically consume Blood Orbs. The additional Bloodlands cast that this aspect does will allow us to implant more Bloodlances onto enemies, which will increase the spread of damage of our Overpower. But the main reason that we're running this is actually because of its ability to consume Blood Orbs anywhere on the screen, and sometimes even off of the screen because the range is so large. You can see how the core engine of this build works. We walk up to a pack, we cast Blood Wave, we then eat all of the orbs that it's spawning with our Bloodlance, and these orbs are going to guarantee that we're always capped on essence, we're always fully healed, and we always have full fortify. And they're also going to constantly be reducing the cooldown on Blood Wave, so we're able to spam it with ease. On top of this, the Decrepify cooldown reduction pairs very nicely with Bloodlance because of how many enemies it's hitting with each cast. Now that we have a good understanding of the main engine of the build, let's dive into the skill tree and start talking about some of these weird interactions and talk about what makes this build do so much damage. For our basic skill, we really have two choices between Reap and Hemorrhage. I end up preferring Hemorrhage because of its range and essence generation, but the damage reduction and corpse that you get from Reap is decent. But with Hemorrhage, it's going to have a chance to spawn a Blood Orb, it's going to give us Fortify, and it's going to cleave enemies after we pick up Blood Orbs, generating significantly more essence. For our core skills, we're going to be, of course, running Bloodlance, but we're only going to be putting 1 point into it because additional points don't increase our Overpower damage. We're obviously taking Enhanced Bloodlance, and then Supernatural Bloodlance will make our Bloodlance overpower every 6 casts, and it will also spawn a Blood Orb, which, as we discussed previously, is extremely important. This is where we get into the first weird mechanic. Imperfectly Balanced works with Overpower. It's going to make our skills cost more essence, but deal more damage, and this actually increases the damage of the Overpower. It's important to know with Imperfectly Balanced that with the upcoming patch, it's going to be increased from a maximum point of 1 to a maximum point of 3. This is a bug currently, and it was much more important that they focus on nerfing Barbarian over fixing this issue. We're also going to be putting 3 points into Hued Flesh, which will give us a 12% chance to spawn a corpse whenever we hit enemies. For our Corpse and Macabre skills, we're going to be putting 3 points into Grim Harvest. This is because of one of our hearts, which will automatically cast corpse heals and constantly consume them. And then with Grim Harvest, we'll gain 6 essence every time a corpse gets consumed. This is part of what allows us to cast Blood Lances with no real thought about our maximum resource. We're also going to be running Corpse Explosion and going all the way to Blighted Corpse Explosion, and this is because it will proc a lot of Lucky Hit, and it will apply Darkness damage over time, which will proc a lot of our defense and offense. We're also going to be running Blood Mist and going all the way to Ghastly Blood Mist to get these corpses. The corpses are really useful for Corpse Tendrils, Corpse Explosion, etc. Moving on to the Curse skills, we're going to be taking Decrepify and going all the way to Abhorrent Decrepify for significant cooldown reduction. Bloodlance works really well with Abhorrent Decrepify, so we're going to get a lot of CDR from this. We're also going to be taking Amplified Damage 3 points, and that's because Amplified Damage actually increases the damage of Overpower. We're also going to be taking Death's Embrace, which will make us take 9% less damage from close enemies and deal 6% more. The 6% damage increase doesn't work. We're purely running this for the 9% damage reduction. Moving on to our Corpse and Macabre skills, we're putting 3 points into Reaper's Pursuit, which will give us 15% movement speed whenever we hit enemies with Darkness skills. This will work with our Corpse Explosion. We should have virtually 100% uptime on the movement speed, which is quite nice. We're putting 1 point into Corpse Tendrils, and we're going all the way to Blighted Corpse Tendrils. Now, I'm experiencing the bug where Blighted Corpse Tendrils is no longer spawning Blood Orbs for me, and there's no current plans in the patch notes to fix this, so we might end up taking this point out. This build will get a lot better once Blighted Corpse Tendrils is working, but for now, it's not working, and, it's very important that we nerf Barbarian and really fix the main issues with the game rather than fixing skills that don't work. With our passives on this tree, they're super important. We're going to be taking 1 point of Gruesome Mending. This is purely just to get access to the rest of these nodes. Coalesced Blood, as we discussed earlier, works with Overpower, so we're putting 3 points into that for 18% damage. Tides of Blood also gives us an additional 30% Overpower damage. It is so much, but we must be healthy to get this buff. 3 points in that for sure. Drain Vitality will give us a chance on hit to give us Fortify, and this is super important, obviously, because Fortify gives us damage reduction and it works well with Overpower, so 3 points into that. Going into our ultimate skills, we're going to be taking Blood Wave with all 3 of the buffs. This will give our Blood Wave the additional orbs and everything else we need. The pushback, as we discussed, very important for our own defense and safety. We're going to be putting 3 points into Inspiring Leader. This is just going to give us 12% attack speed. Attack speed is really important because more attacks equals more Overpower procs. We're going to be putting 3 points into Standalone. This is the best damage reduction buff in the entire game. There is no class with a damage reduction as good as this one. Any build where you're not playing minions is 3 points. We're also going to be putting 3 points into Momentum Mori. This is for the additional damage and tankiness that we get from our minions. Finally, we're going to be putting a point into Rathma's Vigor for our key passive. This will give us a 10% increased life pool, and it will give us a guaranteed overpower every 12 seconds. However, this guaranteed overpower is currently bugged, as we'll discuss later when we get into the Paragon tree, and isn't giving us as much damage as it should be. This bug is getting fixed in the patch, so this will become even better once the patch hits. The skill tree for this build is pretty optimized, and as you can tell, there's a lot of bugged interactions and things not working the way that they're supposed to, and I know that could be a little bit demotivating, but a lot of these things are getting fixed in the next patch, and the things that aren't, hopefully they're going to be hidden in the patch, or they're going to be fixed in the near future. And that sweet hit of Copium is going to take us into the gear and aspects for this build. The stat priorities and your exact aspects are actually really important. I was very surprised when I realized that the stats for this build are much more important than the stats for other builds. This is because maximum life and overpowered damage are both multipliers, so it's as if you can get crit and vulnerable with ridiculously high rolls on every piece of gear. On our helmet, we want cooldown reduction, maximum life, and total armor. The final stat isn't that important. On our chest piece, we want maximum life, total armor, and then 2 damage reduction stats. And it's similar story with our legs, where we again want total armor, maximum life, and 2 damage reduction stats. You can get ranks of blood mist on your legs if you want better uptime on mist, but I think I generally prefer more damage reduction instead. Your gloves are very important. You want overpower damage, attack speed, chance to restore resource on hit, and lucky hit chance. You can see that like our stat priority with this build is very different than other builds. On our boots, we want essence cost reduction, movement speed, and then the last 2 stats aren't a big deal. I prefer ranks of corpse tendrils for the cooldown, and then damage reduction while injured just for a little bit of survivability. Our amulet is very important. Ranks of Tides of Blood are going to give us a substantial amount of damage. We're also going to be running cooldown reduction for better uptime on the blood wave, essence cost reduction, and then any damage reduction for the final stat. For the final stat, you could also run movement speed instead of damage reduction, if you're prioritizing speed farming over pushing. On our rings, we want overpower damage, resource generation, maximum life, and lucky hit chance. Have you ever seen a ring with those stat priorities in your life? You've probably salvaged 5 of those rings already this season, but that's the priority that we want. On our weapon, it barely matters. Item level of the weapon barely matters, and the stats it rolls barely matter. This is because most of the weapon modifiers do nothing for us. The only thing that we care about is to make sure you get overpower damage, and then I guess all stat. And for the final stat, you could get intelligence if you want, but it really doesn't matter. It just gives you a little bit of resistance. So really, the last 2 stats don't even matter. On your offhand, you want to use a focus. This build technically can use a shield, and it's okay, but I personally prefer to run a focus for the increased uptime on our blood wave. So on our offhand, we want cooldown reduction, essence cost reduction, and then 2 damage reduction stats. The aspects for this build are actually very dynamic, but the setup that I'm going to suggest to you is the one that I found the most success with. Between our helmets and pants, we're going to want the aspect of might and the aspect of the embalmer. The aspect of might is going to give us 20% damage reduction for 6 seconds after we use a basic skill, so we're definitely going to want to keep that up. And then the aspect of the embalmer is very important. It gives us a chance to spawn a blood orb every time we consume a corpse. And because we're constantly casting corpse explosions for free, every corpse around us is constantly getting consumed. So we're getting essence from that because of our skill tree, and then it has a chance to spawn a blood orb, and the orb, remember, will heal us, reduce our cooldown, our ultimate, and give us fortify and resource. So this is really important. The embalmer is very important. On our chest, we're going to be running the aspect of explosive mist. So this aspect isn't all that impressive in this build. It's basically just going to reduce the cooldown of blood mist by about 1.5 seconds. But I still prefer to run it just because there isn't really anything else that we care about. On our boots, we're going to be running the Exploiter's aspect. This gives us an additional 40% damage against unstoppable enemies, and because of our corpse tendrils and blood wave, we're constantly making enemies unstoppable, so this ends up being quite a bit of damage. This is particularly useful against isolated elites, who we typically struggle with, but with this aspect, it becomes quite a bit easier to kill them. The next set of aspects can be run on your glove, weapon, or offhand. It's all interchangeable. The first one is the aspect of Rathma's Chosen, which will give us a 50% attack speed buff after we overpower. And because we're overpowering all the time, and especially because of Rathma's Vigor, we're going to be overpowering at the start of every fight. So this means we're always going to have this 50% damage buff. This does not appear to currently work with Barber if you've already crit them, but in the patch this should be fixed, and then we'll definitely have 100% uptime. We're also going to be running the Tidal Aspect for 2 additional waves every time we cast Blood Wave. And then finally, Gore Quills is going to make our Blood Lance consumes blood orbs to conjure free lances. This will allow us to mark more enemies with our lances so that when we overpower, it's going to damage more enemies. But also, this is going to cause our Blood Lance to suck in orbs from all over the map. And it will even suck orbs that are off the screen because the range is so big. This aspect sucks orbs even better than your mother. This way we can just stand still and hold down Blood Lance and pump out loads of damage without worrying about our health, resources, or anything. Under Necklace, we're going to be running the aspect of Disobedience. Even though this aspect has been nerfed, it is still by far the best defensive aspect in the game. It's not even close. So this is a really important aspect, and we're running it on our Necklace to make it even more powerful. On our rings, we're going to be running the Fast Blood aspect, which will reduce the cooldown of our ultimate by 1.5 seconds every time we pick up a Blood Orb, which is all the time, and this is what's allowing us to just spam Blood Wave. And then, as we've mentioned a few times, we're going to be running the aspect of Potent Blood on our other ring, and this will cause our Blood Orbs to restore 20 essence as long as we're at maximum life. And because there's such an insane supply of Blood Orbs coming in, we're spawning them constantly, we're attacking ridiculously fast, so you're just getting pumped with orbs. You're proccing this all the time. It's so difficult for you not to be at full life. The only way you really die with this build is if you get one shot. Let's talk Paragon. Our Paragon board is optimized for as much life, armor, and overpowered damage as possible. Remember, most of the things that work well for other builds don't work at all for us, so a bunch of the legendary nodes don't do anything, and a bunch of the rare and magic nodes also don't do anything. So with this in mind, let's talk about the board. The only legendary node that works for us is Bloodbath. Every other node does not increase the damage of Overpower. In terms of glyphs, we're going to be taking Amplify because this does work. We're going to be taking Control. Now, the first part of Control doesn't work, the bonus damage to crowd controlled, but the damage multiplier against crowd control does work, so we will be taking that. We're going to be taking Undaunted, which again, the damage bonus doesn't work, but the 10% damage reduction does, and we want that damage reduction. We're also going to be taking Dominate, which this will give us increased overpower damage flat, and also a damage multiplier on our overpower. So this is our best damaging glyph. We're definitely taking that one. Blood Drinker is going to give an increase to the magic nodes, which will give us more armor, and then it's going to make our Blood Orbs fortify us. This is where our Fortify from Blood Orbs is coming from. And aside from those things, everything that we're taking is either just a node that gives armor, life, or overpower damage. There's going to be a link to the full build in the description below. If there's any questions you have, it's probably answered there. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.